The lawyer's voice faded into white noise as I stared at the weathered envelope in my hands. My sister's triumphant smirk burned into the side of my face while the words Riverdale Estate and all associated assets echoed in my ears. My fingers trembled, crinkling the paper that outlined my inheritance. Old Creek Farm, 50 acres of drought-stricken land that hadn't produced a viable crop in over a decade. Is this some kind of sick joke? The words escaped my lips before I could stop them, my voice cracking as I looked up at Mr. Patterson, my parents' attorney of 30 years. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable. I'm afraid not, Nathan. The will is quite clear. Diana receives the family estate, the investment portfolio, and the majority shareholding in Mackenzie Industries. You receive Old Creek Farm, as stipulated by your father. Diana reached over and squeezed my arm with manicured fingers. Don't worry, little brother. I'm sure you can turn that place into something. Her voice dripped with false sympathy that made my stomach turn. I stood up so quickly the chair crashed behind me. They left her millions and gave me worthless dirt? After everything. I couldn't finish. The room spun as 32 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and misplaced faith collapsed around me. Nathan, the lawyer, began, but I was already halfway to the door. Congratulations on your windfall, Diana, I managed, turning back one last time. I guess Dad finally showed us both exactly what we were worth to him. 2 weeks later, I stood on the crumbling porch of what was now my only possession. Old Creek Farm had been in the Mackenzie family for generations, but my father had all but abandoned it after a series of failed harvests in favor of his technology ventures, the ones that made him rich, the ones he'd just handed entirely to Diana. Growing up, I'd been the dutiful son. When Dad needed someone at the office on weekends, I was there. When Mom's health declined 3 years ago, I moved back home to help care for her while Diana continued her glamorous life in New York, visiting only for holidays and the occasional weekend when it suited her schedule. You're the responsible one, Dad would say, his hand heavy on my shoulder. Diana has her talents, but the family needs your steadiness. I believed him. I believed that my sacrifices meant something, that I was investing in my future, in our family's legacy. I gave up a promising career in environmental engineering to work at my father's company. I gave up relationships that distracted me from family obligations. I gave up my own dreams because I was raised to believe that family came first. And now this. A broken-down farmhouse and acres of barren land while Diana inherited a fortune she'd done nothing to earn. The injustice burned like acid in my chest. My phone vibrated. Diana's name flashed on the screen. The estate agent says the house needs to be cleared by the end of the month, she said without preamble. I'm having Mom and Dad's things packed for storage. What about my childhood stuff? My photos? I asked, suddenly panicked. I'll have someone box it up for you, she replied dismissively. Oh, and Nathan? Dad's memorial service is being moved up. The country club had a cancellation for this Saturday. I gripped the phone tighter. Were you planning to consult me on any of this? Why would I need to? I'm the executor, she said with that infuriating calm she'd perfected since childhood. Besides, you've got your hands full with your inheritance. After we hung up, I kicked at the rotting porch step until my foot went through the wood, sending splinters flying as pain shot up my leg. Perfect. Just perfect. The memorial service was everything Dad would have wanted: exclusive, elegant, and filled with the business elite he'd spent his life impressing. I stood awkwardly in my one good suit, nursing a glass of scotch and watching Diana work the room like she was born for it. In many ways, she was. Your father was so proud of Diana, Mrs. Holloway, one of my parents' oldest friends, said as she sidled up to me. Such a shame about you leaving the company last year. He was quite disappointed. I nearly choked on my drink. I didn't leave. I was pushed out when he restructured. Mrs. Holloway's eyes widened slightly. Oh, that's not what your sister told everyone. She said you wanted to find yourself or some such nonsense. My blood ran cold as I scanned the room with new eyes. How many other lies had Diana spread? How long had she been undermining me? At the podium, Diana dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. My father built his legacy on hard work and smart decisions, she said, her voice carrying across the hushed room. And I promised to honor that legacy. When it was my turn to speak, my prepared remarks felt hollow, so I simply said, my father was a complicated man. I'm still trying to understand his final message to me. Later, as I watched Diana accept condolences with graceful nods, I overheard her talking to Patterson, the attorney. Nathan always was a disappointment to Dad, she murmured. The farm was more than generous considering his contributions. Something inside me shattered. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. This was about my entire identity being rewritten by the sister I'd defended and protected our whole lives. The sister who had somehow convinced our father that I was worthless. When I confronted her in the parking lot, her mask slipped momentarily. You're making a scene, Nathan. As usual. Tell me the truth. What did you say to Dad about me? She slid into her Mercedes and looked up at me with cold eyes. I didn't have to say anything. You showed him who you were every time you questioned his decisions. He needed loyalty, not criticism. As she drove away, I realized the depth of her betrayal. Every time I'd suggested more sustainable business practices, every time I'd questioned ethical corners being cut, she'd framed it as disloyalty, and Dad had believed her. 1 month after the funeral, I hit rock bottom. The farm's well had run dry. I was sleeping on a cot in what used to be a tool shed because the farmhouse roof had partially collapsed, and I'd just received a property tax bill I couldn't hope to pay. My phone rang. Diana again. I'm having a dinner party for Dad's old business partners next weekend, she announced. I need you to come and help smooth things over with the Richardsons. They've been asking about you. I laughed, a hollow sound. You're kidding, right? You want me to play the dutiful brother at your mansion while I'm living in a shed? Don't be dramatic, Nathan. This is important for maintaining the family's business relationships. Something snapped inside me. There is no family business relationship, Diana. There's your business, which you got for free, and there's me, trying to survive on what's left of this godforsaken farm. If you can't handle what Dad left you, that's hardly my problem. I'm done. I cut her off, my voice suddenly steady. I'm done playing by your rules. I'm done being the good brother. I'm done pretending we're a family. What are you saying? For the first time, she sounded uncertain. I'm saying I'm going to find out why Dad really gave you everything. I'm saying I'm going to discover what happened in those final months when you suddenly became his favorite. And I'm saying that when I do, you'll wish you'd been fair to me when you had the chance. You're being ridiculous. Watch me, I said, and ended the call. That night, I dug through the old farm records stored in a rusted filing cabinet. There had to be something here, some reason why Dad would have kept this particular property instead of selling it along with the other failing assets years ago. Just before dawn, I found a geological survey from 15 years earlier, marked confidential. Dad had known something about this land that he'd kept hidden. And now I needed to find out what. The memory hit me like a physical blow as I stared at the survey maps. Dad standing with me on this very property when I was 17, his arm around my shoulders as we looked out over fields that were green and thriving back then. Someday, son, you'll understand why this land matters, he'd said. There are things more valuable than what appears on the surface. I'd been so proud that day, so sure of my place in his heart. It was before Diana graduated from business school and captivated him with her ruthless approach to growth and profit. Before Mom got sick and I became the caretaker while Diana became the rising star. I remembered the summer I turned 22, fresh out of college with my environmental engineering degree, eager to help modernize Dad's growing company with sustainable practices. I'd prepared for weeks, creating detailed presentations on how we could lead the industry in green technology. "We don't have time for pet projects, Nathan," Dad had said, barely glancing at my work. "Diana's merger proposal needs priority. Your ideas are impractical." That night, I'd overheard them talking. "Nathan doesn't understand business," Dad told Diana. "He's too idealistic. Too soft. He'll learn," Diana had replied. "Or he won't. Either way, I've got your back, Daddy." I'd thrown myself into proving him wrong after that, working twice as hard, sacrificing my personal life, abandoning my own values to adopt his. Nothing was ever enough. The final betrayal came just after Mom died. I'd found documents showing questionable waste disposal practices at one of the company plant's dangerous shortcuts that could harm the surrounding community. "You need to fix this," I'd told him privately. "This could hurt people." His face had hardened. "This is why you'll never run the company, Nathan. You don't have what it takes to make tough decisions." A week later, my position was eliminated in a restructuring. 2 months after that, Dad had his first heart attack. By then, Diana had moved into the office next to his and was effectively running the company. I never got to speak to him alone again. "You looking to drill a well?" The voice startled me out of my thoughts. I turned to find an older man standing at the edge of my property, leaning on a weathered walking stick. "Frank Holden," he introduced himself. "Used to work with your grandfather back in the day." I invited him in, embarrassed by the state of the place, but desperate for any connection to the farm's past. Frank settled onto my one rickety chair and glanced at the survey maps spread on the makeshift table. "I see you found Warner's report," he said, tapping the geological survey. "Your daddy buried that pretty deep." My heart skipped. "You know about this?" Frank's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. "Son, there's a reason your grandfather never sold this land despite offers that would have made him rich. Same reason your father kept it even when he was liquidating assets left and right." He pointed to markings on the map I hadn't understood. "That's not showing water tables. That's showing something much more valuable. Something your daddy discovered right around the time he started that technology company of his." "What are you saying?" My mouth went dry. "This land sits on one of the richest deposits of rare earth minerals in the state, the kind they use in every piece of fancy technology your daddy's company made. The kind that's worth millions but nearly impossible to get permits to extract." I stared at him in disbelief. If that's true, why would he leave it to me instead of Diana? She got everything else of value. Frank's eyes held mine. "Maybe he wasn't as blind as you thought. Maybe he knew exactly what he was doing, giving his environmentalist son land that would require careful, ethical handling, land that his profit-driven daughter would have stripped bare without a second thought." As Frank left, he handed me a business card. "My nephew's an environmental attorney. Specializes in responsible resource development. Might be worth a call." For the first time since the will reading, I felt something other than despair, a flicker of possibility, and with it, the first stirrings of a plan. 3 weeks and countless hours of research later, I sat across from Diana in her elegant home office, trying to keep my expression neutral as she complained about production costs at the factory. "The point is," she concluded, "we need to find cheaper sources for these components, or profit margins will continue to shrink." Dad would have found a solution. "Actually," I said carefully, sliding a folder across her desk, "I think Dad already did." She opened it, frowning at the contents. "What am I looking at?" "The real reason Dad kept Old Creek Farm. It contains deposits of neodymium, dysprosium, and several other rare earth elements essential for the components in Mackenzie Industries' flagship products." Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "These reports are ancient. If there was anything valuable there, Dad would have extracted it years ago. Not without creating an environmental disaster he couldn't hide," I countered. "The deposits are interwoven with the water table. Traditional extraction would contaminate groundwater for miles. Dad knew that. He also knew I would find a better way." She laughed, but it sounded forced. You're delusional. That worthless farm is just what it appears to be Dad's way of giving you something without actually giving you anything. I placed another document on her desk, an email I'd discovered in Dad's archived accounts, sent to his attorney just weeks before his death. Nathan has always seen value where others see obstacles, Dad had written. The farm is his true inheritance. Diana will take care of the business, but Nathan will create the future. Diana's face drained of color as she read it. He knew, I said quietly. He knew you'd manipulated him against me. He knew I'd eventually discover what the land contained. And he knew I would find an environmentally sound way to extract it, which is why he left me his research notes in that decrepit filing cabinet. This doesn't change anything, Diana snapped, regaining her composure. The company is still mine. The fortune is still mine. True, I agreed, retrieving the email and standing to leave. But the future? That belongs to me. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of activity. With Frank's nephew's help, I secured permits for a pilot program using a new extraction method I'd developed during my environmental engineering days, one that would protect the groundwater while recovering the valuable minerals. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, pouring every penny I could borrow into the project. I converted the old barn into a small processing facility, hiring local workers who'd lost jobs when the big factory farms moved in decades earlier. The first extraction test yielded results beyond my wildest expectations. The minerals were not only present, but in concentrations high enough to make even modest operations tremendously profitable. More importantly, I was using methods that honored the land rather than exploiting it. Solar panels powered our equipment. Water used in processing was filtered and recycled. Nothing went to waste. Word spread. A tech journalist wrote a feature about the green mining revolution happening at Old Creek Farm. Investors called. Sustainable technology companies reached out about partnerships. I turned most of them down. This was my project, my vision. I would build it my way. The farmhouse roof got fixed. The well was repaired. The first paychecks went out to my small but growing team of workers, many of whom had known my grandfather. He would have been proud, Frank told me one evening as we watched the sunset from the newly rebuilt porch. Not just of what you found, but of how you found it. I still don't understand why Dad didn't just tell me, I admitted. Frank shrugged. Some lessons can't be given, only earned. Your daddy wanted you to discover your own strength. As the operation grew, so did my confidence. The frightened, betrayed man I'd been at the funeral was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, someone who'd created value instead of just inheriting it. Diana's call came exactly as I'd expected, right after the Wall Street Journal ran a piece estimating the value of Old Creek Farm's mineral deposits at over $300 million. We need to talk, she said, her voice businesslike. I'm thinking we should combine resources. Mackenzie Industries needs reliable access to those minerals, and you need our distribution network. I leaned back in my office chair, real furniture now, in a renovated farmhouse filled with light and purpose. Do I, though? I asked mildly. Don't be difficult, Nathan. This makes sense for both of us. It makes sense for you, I corrected her. Your suppliers are price gouging you because they know you're desperate. Your last quarterly report showed a 15% drop in profits. Silence stretched between us. How do you know about our quarterly report? She finally asked, her voice tight. I've become quite friendly with several board members, I replied. They're very interested in my operation. Especially since I've demonstrated a more efficient extraction process that cuts production costs by nearly 30%. You wouldn't, she whispered. Wouldn't what? Build my own company? Create something sustainable and profitable that honors our family legacy while looking toward the future? That's exactly what I'm doing. Those board members report to me, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. For now, I agreed pleasantly. But there's a shareholders meeting next month, isn't there? I hear there are some concerns about leadership. "You're trying to take the company," she accused. "No, Diana. I'm building something better. Something Dad would have recognized as truly valuable if you'd ever given him the chance to see beyond your manipulations." I could almost hear her mind racing, calculating, planning her next move. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Nothing from you," I answered truthfully. "Not anymore. I've already got everything I need." As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the window, shoulders straight, eyes clear. Finally free. 2 years to the day after that devastating reading, I stood on the hill overlooking Old Creek Farm, though it hardly resembled the broken-down property I'd inherited. Solar arrays glinted in the late afternoon sun. The processing facility had expanded, but thoughtfully, with green roofs and efficient designs that complemented rather than dominated the landscape. Workers' vehicles filled the parking area, local people with good jobs and profit-sharing plans that made them partners in our success. Mackenzie Sustainable Resources had become an industry leader, not just in mineral extraction, but in responsible business practices. The technologies we'd developed were being adopted worldwide, reducing the environmental impact of an industry known for its destructiveness. Diana had fought hard, but ultimately lost her position as CEO of our father's company after a shareholder revolt led by board members impressed with my operation. She still owned her shares, was still wealthy by any standard, but her power was diminished. We spoke occasionally strained, formal conversations that would never recover the closeness we'd had as children before ambition and manipulation came between us. Some wounds don't heal completely, but they do scar over with time. Last month, she'd visited the farm for the first time, her designer heels incongruous against the gravel driveway. "I underestimated you," she'd admitted, surveying what I'd built. "We all did." "That was your mistake," I replied, not unkindly. Not seeing value in what looked worthless at first glance. She'd nodded, something like regret flickering across her features. "Dad would have been impressed." "Maybe," I said. "But that's not why I did it." Now, watching the sun set over my thriving enterprise, I thought about the path that had brought me here. The betrayal had nearly broken me, but in that breaking, I discovered something essential. True inheritance isn't what's given to you, it's what you create from what you have. The worthless farm had contained treasure, yes, but the real value lay in what I'd made of it: a sustainable business, a restored ecosystem, a community of people working together towards something meaningful. Sometimes the greatest fortune isn't what's bequeathed in a will, but what's discovered when you're forced to dig deep in barren soil, the resilience that transforms inheritance into legacy.